Hello everyone, welcome to our channel. We're so happy to have you here today, and if you haven't already, please make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming tips, stories, and lessons on language learning. We love bringing you motivational talks, practical guides, and real-life experiences that can help you on your own journey toward fluency in English or any other language you might be studying. Today, we'll be focusing on a crucial topic: how to stay motivated and patient throughout the long and sometimes challenging process of language learning. Many people begin their journey full of enthusiasm and energy, only to find themselves feeling discouraged or impatient when they don't see quick results. We want to remind you that consistent, patient practice leads to real progress, and that celebrating small wins along the way will help keep you going even through those inevitable moments of frustration. We have plenty of stories, real examples, and strategies to share with you in this long discussion. So settle in, and let's explore this vital aspect of language learning. First, let me share a personal story that illustrates the difference patience can make. Several years ago, I was teaching English to a group of adult learners in a community center. Among them was a woman named Fumiko who had recently moved from Japan to our city. Fumiko was eager to communicate fluently in English because she had landed a new job that involved interacting with clients. At first, Fumiko's approach was to cram as much information into her brain as possible. She studied vocabulary lists for hours, listened to English podcasts at double speed, and carried around grammar books to read during her lunch break. Initially, that surge of intensity seemed promising. She made rapid gains in her first few weeks, learning many new words and expressions. However, by the end of the second month, she felt overwhelmed and exhausted. She came to me one day and confessed that she wanted to quit altogether because she simply didn't feel like she was seeing the rapid improvement she expected. The daily repetition of grammar drills and the slow process of comprehension began to wear her down. She saw other people around her apparently advancing faster, which made her doubt her own methods and caused her to compare herself harshly to others. When we sat down to talk, I reminded her that language learning is not a simple equation where you put in a few weeks of intense memorization and magically reach fluency. Instead, it's a marathon requiring steady, patient effort over a long period. I suggested that she restructure her study routine to be more sustainable and more rewarding on a daily basis. Rather than pushing herself to study for hours in one sitting, she could schedule short study sessions throughout the day, perhaps 15 minutes here and 20 minutes there, ensuring that she remained consistent without burning out. We also talked about the importance of celebrating small wins. For example, if she managed to greet her colleagues more confidently one day, or if she understood a brief conversation without needing subtitles, that was a tangible achievement to be proud of. By shifting her mindset from "I must become perfectly fluent as soon as possible" to "I will improve step by step, and each small success is worth celebrating," Fumiko was able to reduce her stress and rediscover her original motivation. It took time, several weeks, in fact, for her to recalibrate. But eventually, she found a new rhythm, a more modest set of goals, and a pattern of study that allowed her to keep going for months without the emotional crashes she had experienced earlier. By the end of her first year, she'd made significant progress, not only in her English skills, but also in her overall confidence. Stories like Fumiko's are more common than you might think. So many language learners start out believing that intense bursts of study will get them to advanced proficiency in a matter of weeks. When reality proves different, they feel demoralized. One of the biggest keys to staying motivated is therefore learning to accept the slow, steady nature of genuine skill development. You can't simply force yourself to learn a language at an unnatural speed. Your brain needs time to absorb new vocabulary and grammar, to connect them, to move them from short-term memory to long-term memory, and then to make them available for quick recall when speaking or writing. Impatience can cause you to skip steps or become frustrated too easily. So, if you're finding yourself in that impatient mindset, remind yourself that every day you're practicing, you are laying another brick in the foundation of your future fluency. One strategy to stay motivated is setting realistic goals. That might sound obvious, but it's surprising how many learners approach their language journey with vague or overly ambitious aims. Someone might say, "I want to be fluent in 6 months." But what does fluent even mean for them? Do they need professional-level writing skills, or do they simply want to hold a friendly conversation? If they're not clear on the target, it becomes difficult to track progress, and it's easy to lose motivation when you don't see yourself reaching an ill-defined endpoint. A better approach could be to define something more specific, such as, "Within 3 months, I want to be comfortable enough to order food at a restaurant, introduce myself to people in social settings, and understand the main points of a short news clip in English." Those sorts of goals are measurable and achievable. Once you reach them, you get a motivational boost that encourages you to keep going. Real progress is often made through smaller, tangible objectives rather than one huge leap to a vaguely conceived notion of fluency. Let's talk about another former student, Ahmed, who had a strong desire to improve his spoken English. Ahmed's wife was a native English speaker, and he felt immense pressure to match her fluency level when they spoke around her family. Originally, Ahmed declared he wanted to speak as well as my wife within a year. The reality was that his wife had been speaking English her entire life, and Ahmed had only been learning consistently for a few months. That goal, while ambitious, was not very realistic in terms of the timeline. After discussing it with him, we decided to break it down into smaller targets: improving pronunciation of common vowel sounds, being able to participate confidently in simple conversations about everyday life, and learning to paraphrase if he got stuck on a word. These smaller goals were accompanied by daily or weekly tasks, things like practicing certain vowel drills for 10 minutes a day, recording himself speaking about household topics, and listening carefully to his wife's pronunciations to mimic them. By focusing on these more manageable targets, Ahmed found it easier to see progress. He could notice that a month ago he couldn't comfortably say certain phrases without stumbling, but now he could. That tangible sense of improvement is crucial for keeping your motivation alive. Another vital component of staying motivated is learning to celebrate small wins. In Western culture, sometimes we're taught that we should only celebrate big successes, like completing a course or passing a major exam. But in language learning, progress can be seen in everyday interactions. Imagine you're practicing your listening skills by watching a short video clip without subtitles, and for the first time, you catch an entire sentence perfectly without needing to pause or replay. That's a small but significant win, worth acknowledging. Pat yourself on the back, or even share your excitement with a friend or fellow learner. By marking these little milestones, you build a reservoir of positive experiences that can sustain you when you inevitably hit a plateau or encounter some difficulty down the line. When you notice small successes, the journey feels less like a distant, never-ending climb and more like a path dotted with rewarding discoveries. There was another learner, May, who was a big fan of American TV shows. At first, she relied heavily on Chinese subtitles to understand what was happening, pausing every few seconds to catch up. Over a span of a few months, she decided to switch to English subtitles and watch the same shows. She was surprised that she still understood most of the story. Each time she recognized a new phrase or managed to guess the meaning of something unfamiliar from context, She made a note in a small achievements journal. It might read something like, "Understood a whole scene from my favorite show with no subtitles," or "Caught a new slang expression and looked it up to confirm." By writing these small achievements down, she could look back after a week or a month and see how far she had come. That record acted like a motivation bank. On days she felt stuck or convinced she wasn't improving, she'd flip through her journal and realize she was accomplishing a lot, just in small increments. That perspective shift is often all we need to keep going. The realization that we are, in fact, getting better bit by bit. One of the bigger challenges in staying motivated is dealing with the inevitable plateaus. You might be studying for months, noticing consistent improvement, but then you reach a level where you feel you're not making any more progress. Everything seems to stall, and you start wondering if you've hit your limit, or if maybe you're just not trying hard enough. Plateaus are a natural part of skill development. The initial phases of learning tend to bring rapid gains, partly because you're starting from scratch. Every new word or grammar point is brand new, so you can quickly add them to your arsenal. But as you progress, you're dealing with finer nuances and a much larger base of knowledge, so it might feel like you're moving in slow motion. One way to overcome plateaus is to vary your learning methods. If you've been sticking to reading textbooks and memorizing vocabulary lists, try incorporating more real-world practice, like conversation groups, online language exchanges, or even creative writing exercises. Perhaps you can try singing your favorite songs in English or watch stand-up comedy in the language you're learning. Changing your routine refreshes your brain and can unlock a new wave of progress by challenging you differently. Another common source of demotivation is comparing yourself to others. You might see someone who started learning around the same time you did, but now they seem to speak more fluently, have better pronunciation, or have a larger vocabulary. One truth we must accept is that everyone's learning path is unique. Some people have more time to dedicate. Others might already have some background in related languages, giving them an advantage. Some might simply have a knack for picking up languages quickly. While it can be inspiring to see others succeed, it can also breed discouragement if we're not careful. That's why it's important to compare yourself to your past self, not to your peers. Look at where you were a month or 6 months ago. Can you see improvement since then? If yes, that's a sign you're on the right track, regardless of how fast someone else might be progressing. If you have a friend who's racing ahead, see if you can learn from their strategies without feeling threatened or belittled by their success. It's also essential to keep in mind that motivation often ebbs and flows. There will be days when you're eager to study, to speak, to watch videos or read articles in your target language, and it feels almost effortless. Then there will be days when you have to drag yourself to do even the simplest task, or you find yourself procrastinating. This fluctuation is normal for any long-term project, whether it's language learning, fitness goals, or writing a novel. Instead of trying to maintain peak motivation all the time, learn to manage your energy and resources. On days you feel especially motivated, maybe do a bit more, but on days you're feeling tired or busy, allow yourself a scaled-back version of your study routine. The key is consistency, not perfection. Even doing 10 or 15 minutes of practice can keep your momentum going, so that when your motivation returns, you can pick up without having lost too much ground. I had a student named Victor who was working full-time and taking night classes to improve his English. He felt inspired some days and drained on others, especially after a stressful day at work. One method that helped him was creating a tiered study plan. He had a maximum plan for days when he had plenty of energy and a minimum plan for days when he was too exhausted to do much. The maximum plan might include 30 minutes of vocabulary review, 30 minutes of reading, and 30 minutes of conversation practice with a language partner. The minimum plan was something like 10 minutes of looking at vocabulary flashcards on his phone or quickly reviewing a short grammar tip. By giving himself permission to scale down on days he was feeling low, Victor stayed consistent. He never went to bed feeling like he had completely given up, and thus he avoided the guilt and frustration that sometimes come from missing a day entirely. Over the course of a year, he made remarkable progress, and he often credited the tiered approach for helping him remain balanced and patient. Now let's talk about the emotional side of patience. Many learners feel an urgency, sometimes linked to a personal or professional deadline. Maybe they're moving to a new country soon, or they need to pass an English proficiency test for a job application. That urgency can create anxiety, making them want to rush through the process. While deadlines can be a good motivator, they can also lead to burnout if you're not careful. One approach is to build in relaxation and reflection sessions into your study schedule. This might sound unproductive, but regularly setting aside time to reflect on what you've learned, to evaluate which methods are working and which are not, and to just decompress can actually accelerate your progress over the long haul. If your mind is always tense and panicked, you'll have trouble internalizing new information. Remember that the process of learning is as much psychological as it is intellectual, and too much stress can impede memory and comprehension. Another good practice is to incorporate language learning into activities you already find enjoyable, thus blending relaxation with study. For instance, if you love cooking, try following recipes in your target language. If you're into gaming, look for a game you can play in that language, or find an online community to chat with about game-related topics. This approach helps you remain patient because it removes some of the pressure of "I have to study now" and replaces it with natural engagement. When you're immersed in something you're passionate about, you're more likely to stay with it longer, and you're less likely to become discouraged if progress isn't immediate. Plus, you'll be learning the language in a context that genuinely interests you, which tends to result in more meaningful acquisition of new vocabulary and phrases. Let me share another example. Carla was a passionate traveler who had a goal of visiting South America for 3 months and communicating effectively in Spanish. At first, she tried reading through textbooks, but found herself easily bored and discouraged. Then she decided to connect her Spanish learning to her love of travel. She started watching travel vlogs in Spanish, reading blog posts about destinations she planned to visit, and learning key phrases specific to tourism, transportation, and sightseeing. She also found Spanish-speaking travel communities online where she could practice by discussing places she wanted to see. Her excitement for the actual trip kept her motivated, and she hardly thought of her study time as studying. Instead, it became part of planning her dream vacation. Even though she didn't become fully fluent by the time she boarded her flight, she could see week-to-week improvements, and that was more than enough to keep her patient and committed. Another crucial factor in long-term motivation is having a supportive community. It might be a group of classmates, an online forum, or just 1 or 2 close friends or relatives who understand your goals. Having someone to share victories with, even small ones, can make a big difference in how you perceive your progress. Likewise, talking about your frustrations or plateaus can help you release negative feelings before they turn into burnout. If you don't have an in-person community, look online. There are numerous language exchange platforms and social media groups where people share tips, ask questions, and celebrate milestones. By seeing other people on the same journey, you gain perspective that your challenges are normal and that with persistence you can overcome them. Some learners find it helpful to have a language mentor or tutor with whom they regularly check in. This mentor doesn't have to be a professional teacher, though it can be. Even a more advanced speaker or a native speaker who's willing to guide you informally can serve as a mentor. The idea is that they'll provide you with occasional feedback, accountability, and a broader perspective. They might notice your improvements more objectively than you do, simply because they see how your skills evolve over time. When you feel like you're stuck and not moving forward, your mentor might say, "Actually, you used to struggle with basic sentence structure, but now you're comfortably forming more complex sentences," reminding you that you're still on a forward trajectory. This external validation can be a powerful motivator, especially during periods of self-doubt. Another angle to address is the notion of language plateaus at advanced stages. Learners often talk about the dreaded intermediate plateau, but there's also a phenomenon at the upper intermediate or advanced levels where you feel comfortable in most common situations, yet still find certain advanced nuances, expressions, or specialized topics challenging. At that point, improvement becomes more subtle, and it might be that your progress is more about perfecting certain grammar nuances, mastering idiomatic expressions, or getting rid of a persistent accent issue. Because these improvements are less dramatic and less frequent, it's easy to feel like you're no longer advancing. In reality, you're just refining your skills. One strategy to maintain motivation at advanced levels is to set micro goals. For example, maybe you decide to master a new phrasal verb every week or focus on refining your pronunciation of certain tricky words. You might also delve deeper into your areas of personal interest, reading more sophisticated articles or academic papers, or participating in debates. By challenging yourself with higher-level tasks, you keep your mind engaged and avoid complacency. Let's consider the story of Embark, a Polish entrepreneur who reached a high level of English. He could hold business conversations, negotiate deals, and watch English-language movies with almost no difficulty. Yet he felt stuck because his speech lacked some of the nuances and idiomatic flair that native speakers or extremely advanced learners displayed. He might say something like, "I think this plan is very good. Instead of 'I'm really on board with this plan,' it sounds promising." While both are correct, the latter sounds more natural to native ears. Embark felt frustrated that he was still so far from his dream of speaking exactly like a native. We discussed setting micro goals, like learning one new idiomatic expression a day, and then actively trying to use it in conversation or in an email. Over time, these incremental additions made his speech more fluid and expressive. He also explored audio materials like podcasts where speakers used casual, idiomatic language, pausing whenever he heard something interesting and repeating it out loud. He wrote down phrases he wanted to incorporate into his own vocabulary, practicing them until they felt natural. By focusing on these smaller, attainable goals, Embark found renewed motivation and satisfaction in his progress, even though he had already reached a high level. Another way to keep your motivation strong is to remind yourself of your reasons for learning the language in the first place. Perhaps you want to better communicate with family members who speak it, or maybe you have a career goal that requires a certain proficiency, or you have a love for the culture that speaks this language natively. Write down your motivations on a piece of paper or in a digital note. Include not just logical reasons, but emotional ones too. Perhaps you remember a time you felt embarrassed because you couldn't express yourself clearly. Or maybe you recall how wonderful it felt to understand a foreign movie without subtitles. These memory triggers can help reignite your drive on days when you might be feeling apathetic or doubt why you're putting in the effort. Regularly revisiting your why can provide a sense of purpose that keeps you patient, even when progress is slow. We should also talk about the concept of self-care in the context of language learning. Studying relentlessly without break can lead to mental exhaustion, which hurts your long-term motivation. Sometimes you need to take a step back and do something entirely different to recharge your mind. Go for a walk, spend time with friends, or enjoy a hobby that's not directly related to your language study. Giving yourself mental rest can help you come back to your learning with renewed energy and clearer focus. One learner I knew, Rashid, found that taking a short, language-free weekend each month helped him avoid burnout. During these weekends, he wouldn't touch any of his English study materials. He spent time on other interests like hiking and photography. On Monday, he often felt more eager to resume learning because he had missed it a little, and his brain had time to solidify what he had studied the previous week. Patience also involves accepting that mistakes and setbacks are part of the journey. Many learners become discouraged when they realize they've been mispronouncing a word for weeks, or when a native speaker corrects them on something they thought they'd already mastered. But these moments are necessary for growth. They highlight where you still have room to learn. Instead of seeing them as failures, try to reframe them as signposts guiding you in the right direction. Each correction is one step closer to more accurate language use. Think about a baby learning to walk. They fall dozens or hundreds of times, but each time they get back up, they're a little bit steadier. We never scold a baby for falling. We cheer every time they stand again. Similarly, you should mentally applaud yourself each time you try, notice an error, and work to correct it. To illustrate the power of embracing mistakes, let me share a story about a group language class I conducted. I had the students write and perform short skits in English in front of each other. They were all quite nervous, but I told them the goal wasn't a perfect performance. It was to have fun and learn from any slip-ups. During the first few skits, whenever someone messed up a line or forgot a word, they'd freeze and look at me, worried they'd failed. But I'd encourage them to keep going, to improvise, to ask for help from their partners, or to simply say, "Sorry, I forgot that word, let me try again." By the end of the exercise, the students were laughing at their flubs, spontaneously correcting themselves, and genuinely enjoying the creative process. Interestingly, many of them later reported that this was one of the most memorable classes because they felt free to experiment without judgment. That experience showed them that mistakes can be a valuable and even fun part of language practice. The environment we place ourselves in is crucial as well. If you're in a place where every mistake is met with ridicule or harsh criticism, your motivation will likely dwindle quickly. Seek out classes or study groups where the atmosphere is welcoming, supportive, and understanding. If such a group doesn't exist, consider starting one. You'd be surprised how many people are in the same situation, trying to stay motivated and patient, wanting a friendly space to practice. They, too, might welcome the idea of celebrating small wins and supporting each other through challenging moments. Let me share another anecdote. I once taught a free conversational English session at a local library. The group was diverse, with people from different countries, ages, and backgrounds. None of them were professional teachers, but all were eager to learn or improve their English. We established a set of norms at the beginning. We'd all be patient with each other, correct gently when needed, and highlight something positive each participant said during the conversation. Over several sessions, the group formed genuine friendships. People would bring treats from their cultures, swap stories about their families, and share achievements like, "I managed to ask for a refund at a store with no trouble." Those small personal victories kept everyone's spirits up. Even those who started off shy began to speak more, trusting that any mistakes they made would be met with understanding, not scorn. By the end of a few months, they were more confident, not just in their English skills, but in social interactions. This shows how the right kind of community can cultivate patience and motivation quite organically. Another practical suggestion is to periodically reevaluate your study methods. What worked for you as a beginner might not work as well once you reach an intermediate or advanced level. Maybe you started out doing repetitive grammar drills from a textbook, and that helped you grasp basic sentence structures. But now you might need more immersive experiences, like watching TV without subtitles or engaging in debates on complex topics. If you cling to old methods that no longer challenge or excite you, you could lose motivation. On the flip side, if you jump into materials that are too difficult, you might feel discouraged. Finding the right balance in your learning materials is essential. Don't be afraid to experiment until you find what sparks your curiosity at your current stage. It can also help to set up a reward system for yourself. For instance, decide that once you've completed a certain number of study hours, learned a certain number of new phrases, or consistently written in a language journal for a week, you'll treat yourself to something you enjoy. It could be a small indulgence like a favorite dessert or a leisure activity like watching a new movie. Tying achievements to enjoyable rewards can help reinforce the habit of steady study. Some might argue that intrinsic motivation is better than extrinsic motivation, which is true in the grand scheme. However, external rewards can give you that extra push you need on days when your intrinsic motivation is flagging. The point is to keep moving forward, little by little, and celebrating the fact that you're putting in the effort. We should also recognize that motivation sometimes requires stepping away from purely academic study and getting in touch with the cultural elements of the language. If you're learning French, for example, you might watch a French film festival, explore French cuisine, or learn about French history. Getting involved in the culture reminds you that language is more than grammar rules and vocabulary lists. It's a medium for connecting with people's stories, traditions, and ways of life. This broader perspective can reinvigorate your passion for learning when the daily grind of memorizing words feels tedious. A good friend of mine, Lee, studied Italian. She initially focused on the usual grammar and vocabulary exercises, but she started losing steam after a few months. Then she discovered a love for Italian cinema, which became her primary motivation. She would watch classic Italian films, initially with English subtitles, then gradually switching to Italian subtitles, and eventually removing subtitles altogether for scenes she had watched multiple times. She found that experiencing the language in an art form she admired fueled her desire to keep improving. Each time she recognized a phrase from her studies appearing naturally in a movie scene, she felt a jolt of excitement. That excitement translated into more consistent practice and more patience with herself, because she genuinely wanted to understand her favorite films in their original language. This passion for Italian cinema kept her going for years until she became quite proficient. Now let's talk about balancing patience with a sense of urgency or ambition. Patience doesn't mean you never push yourself or that you're entirely relaxed about your goals. You can have a healthy sense of drive, especially if you have specific deadlines like a job interview or an exam date. The trick is to channel that drive in a structured, consistent way rather than rushing or cramming. For instance, if you have an exam in 3 months, map out your study plan. How many hours a day or week can you realistically devote? Which topics will you cover in each week? How will you test your progress along the way? Etc. This structured approach helps maintain a balance between urgency. You have a timeline and patience. You understand it's a process of daily improvement rather than an overnight transformation. Cramming might yield short-term results, but it often leads to forgetting the material quickly and feeling discouraged. Instead, stable, regular study leads to more secure learning and less emotional turmoil. On the topic of celebrating small wins, let's explore that further. A small win could be as simple as realizing that you've used a difficult grammar structure correctly in a spontaneous conversation. It could be reading a short story in your target language and understanding the main plot without checking a dictionary every 2 seconds. It could be noticing that someone asked you a question in English and you replied automatically without translating in your head first. These micro successes are everywhere if you pay attention. The problem is that many learners focus on what they still can't do rather than on what they've already accomplished. Changing this mindset is key to maintaining motivation. If you tend to be self-critical, practice writing down at least one positive learning moment each day. Over time, you'll build a diary of successes that you can look back on whenever you feel like you're not getting anywhere. Let me share a final anecdote about a student named Irina. She was an older adult who decided to learn English for personal satisfaction. She wanted to read her favorite classic novels in the original language and communicate better when traveling. Irina worried she was too old to pick up a new language efficiently. She also felt shy about speaking with younger learners who seemed to catch on faster. But she was determined, and she had a very deliberate approach to celebrating every tiny breakthrough. If she learned 5 new words in a day, she wrote them in a special section of her journal labeled "Today's Triumphs." Whenever she read a paragraph from a novel and understood it without needing to look up more than 1 or 2 words, she called that a victory. She wasn't speedy in her progress, but she was steady, and she always stayed motivated because she placed more emphasis on her daily wins than on the gaps in her knowledge. Over time, she built a solid foundation and learned to read her favorite authors in English with significant comprehension. When asked about her secret, she'd simply say, "I decide every day to notice what I can do, rather than mourn what I can't do yet." That is a perfect encapsulation of the mindset we encourage you to adopt. Notice what you can do, step by step, day by day, and trust that consistent, patient effort will lead you far beyond where you started. Whether you're a complete beginner or someone who's been learning for years, staying motivated and patient is a challenge, but it's one you can handle by employing the strategies we've discussed. Set realistic goals, celebrate small wins, find supportive communities, stay flexible in your methods, and maintain a healthy pace that respects your life circumstances. Above all, remember why you started learning in the first place, and keep that vision close to your heart. Thank you for spending this time with us and diving into this extensive discussion on how to remain motivated and patient in your language learning journey. We hope you found these stories, ideas, and real-life examples helpful in reminding you that progress is a process and that every little step counts. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now. It will ensure you stay updated on all our new content, which ranges from motivational talks and tips to practical lessons and real-life success stories. Also, feel free to leave a comment sharing your own experiences or challenges related to staying motivated. We'd love to hear from you and continue this conversation further. Remember, you are not alone. Language learning is a global effort, and countless other learners are navigating the same road you are on. Let's all support each other, celebrate each small victory, and keep our spirits high. With steady effort, patience, and a willingness to appreciate every bit of progress, you'll be surprised at how far you can go. Keep going, stay positive, and never forget that each day of practice is an investment in your future success.